So this is a talk. This is actually a talk that it's similar in topic to something I did for All Day DevOps a month and change ago, whenever that was, at the beginning of November. The idea here is like a lot of folks, as they go through like a DevOps maturation and a cloud maturation process, they update a lot of stuff. The thing they don't update is basically all of their operational runbooks. That tends to create problems. So this talk was essentially a bunch of lessons learned and other stuff distilled down from working with a bunch of customers as they realized they needed to update kind of their operational practices, why they needed to update some stuff, some theory behind it. I should never step there again, apparently. So just what we're going to get through. My name's Dan. I work at VMware, in case that wasn't obvious from the immediate surroundings. I am on a cloud advocacy team over at VMware, and I realize that cloud advocacy and VMware may seem exclusive to some of you. They're not. I work with some of these misfits over here in the corner. The misfits are waving. But no, our team had to create itself and had to exist because our customers were doing more public cloud, more non-traditional hypervisor-based virtualization stuff. And we needed people who were comfortable dealing with that kind of stuff. So thus we exist. But like a lot of the folks on my team, I'm an old sales engineer. I'm actually an old networking sales engineer. I promise I'm reformed. I do not have a box to sell anyone today. I swear. But I started out in provider-side networking, right? So service provider networking, telecom networking, big, distributed, very small points of presence everywhere that all look kind of the same. It looks a lot like a cloud model. We just didn't call it that 20 years ago, and here we are, right? So that leads me down a path where I actually got into software-defined networking through Nicira Networks, if anyone remembers that company. That got me here to VMware, and then I get to work with a bunch of Kubernetes and cloud-native people now. So, short history. My team and I run a website, cloudjourney.io. That's it over there. We put a lot of our stuff over there. So, if you think anything I had to say today was interesting, or any of the stuff the misfits will have to say throughout the rest of the week, because we're all in here at least once this week, go there. You'll see a lot of other random nonsense that we put together. Okay? So, I like pictures. I like explaining things with pictures. As a result, I had to come up with a metaphor for like how operations work, how operations usually work versus how maybe we want them to work. So herding versus chasing is what we came up with. The reasons why will become apparent in a minute. Because we have a dog. That dog is operations, okay? What does operations do? Generally, operations, a lot of places I've been, they chase stuff. Something happens and they chase it. And they chase it till they either catch it or it goes far enough away they don't think they're ever going to see it again. Okay? Thus, that's a border collie. Okay? And then what do we all care about, right? This is a cloud world. We're not supposed to care about infrastructure anymore. It's not always true, but we're not supposed to. So what do we have? We have our applications, right? So you start in a new environment. Could be a cloud, could be Kubernetes on-prem, could be whatever. You start with something new, okay? You got one or two applications at first. Everything is fine. That dog from the last slide can chase those two apps all day long. It will catch them. There's only two of them. It can't get that bad, right? But that's like proof of concept pilot stage, okay? That's maybe first app in production stage, right? More, getting harder for the dog to corral them, but doable, right? Then eventually you get here, and the dog is dead. It has run itself into the ground and collapsed under the weight of sheer exhaustion, right? And this is where we all get to. And if we don't work on our practices here and here, then we're all totally up a creek when we get here. Okay? So, if operations is that dog, and I'm saying it is, do you want to chase on a big open plot of land around a lake and wherever else, wherever your applications may roam, or do you want to kind of herd them into more manageable paddocks, more manageable spaces that you can follow and you can understand what the definition and the boundaries around them are, right? So This is the model we see traditionally a lot of the time because people's boundaries were basically their data center, right? I have my data center, everything in it is mine, everything not in it is not mine, so I don't care about that stuff, I care about the stuff that is mine. As we move down this path to the world we all now live in, we live in environments that are not necessarily ours. I mean, they're ours, but we don't own them. We kind of borrow them for a while, or maybe we co-own them with somebody else, et cetera, so on and so forth, right? The models are not so clear, so now we have to have boundary conditions that we understand better. And if we move in that way, we stop being this, and we can start being that. Everybody likes the happy dog with bubbles. Okay? So what are some of the things that I took away from talking to a bunch of, and I mean big customers. We're talking tens of thousands of instances, 50,000 instances in some cases, right? So what do we find out as we looked at kind of like how they were designing their processes and their policies, right? They were aiming for the absolute minimum number of viable herds, viable policy areas, essentially. Like, so if we go back, those kind of stone-walled in areas, those fields, they want to have the bare minimum number of those, right? The smaller number of those you have, the better off you are. They're finite, they're describable, they're understandable. Once you start getting more of them, now they start turning into, you know, Leon's little test domain thing for Project X that's around, that he built in February, and nobody actually knows what it does anymore, and it's just this ungrokkable thing that everyone's now afraid to ever turn off or delete or recycle because no one knows what's in it and we're all terrified that we'll break something. Okay? So, if those fields from the previous picture are our domains, right, what are the boundaries, right? Like, how do we define those paddocks? How do we define those fields, right? So it becomes a discussion about policy, which is kind of a four-letter word in our team, but I use it for a reason, and guardrails, right? So I'm the guy on our team who every time someone says policy, I stop them and make them decide what they mean, because that word gets used a lot, and often nobody knows what it means. So I kind of break it down into two families. You got your big P and your little p. Big P is for people, okay? Big P is like organizational policies. They're the things we say, like, hey, we want to, we want to improve our deployment efficiency by 15%, okay? That's a big P people policy. That's an organizational goal. They tend to be a little more aspirational in nature often. They're things that you're going to do, but nobody's entirely sure how you're going to do them or prescriptive about it. Now, little p are specific. They are quantifiable. They are things that could be written in such a way that I could get a machine to parse and process them and check against them. You know, things like, hey, you can't have port 22 open to the world. Okay? You can't have unbounded security groups. You can't have, if I see a star anywhere in policy language, you get a big red X that says nope. I don't care why. I don't care why you did it. You shouldn't do it. Right? It's these kind of things, right? They're quantifiable, parsable, understandable. These, the big P, these are the human conversations that you have to get to the little p. Little p become the guardrails that you can build your policy domains out of, that you can build your fields out of. These are the things you can take and put in an IAM policy. These are the things you can take and make an API call that checks against a threshold on a metric or an alert. Okay? So, and this is another one. The organizations I've worked with that are doing this kind of, building these practices successfully, what are they doing, right? They're taking their human organizational policies and they're figuring out how to distill them down, break them down into small p. How can I make this an actionable, measurable, machine-driven, logic-driven piece of policy, okay? The other key part of that is that you have to start general and only get as specific as you have to. If you start very specific, you get a lot of disconnected, disjointed, kind of one-off type checks that you have to look at. As opposed to if you start general and work towards the specific, you can reuse a lot of the same steps and the same process for different projects, because in some you'll need to go deeper than others, but you're starting from the same base set. Okay? So why do starting points matter? So again, I like pictures. If I start specific and eventually get general and zoom out, I get this. I get the gerrymandered as heck district whatever map of Chicago, right? If I start general and get specific, what do I get? Well, it looks a lot like when I used to fly from Denver to San Francisco all the time, and I'd see fields across Colorado and parts of the West, right? Big, huge areas on these big, huge ranches, but you could see where they very intentionally and very deliberately been divided into wheat, corn, soybeans, whatever the heck else people plant in the middle on some of these fields, right? But you could see the design and the intention. Whereas here, you lose the design and the intention, and you just end up with some random amorphous blob that you then have to figure out how to describe to people in a review meeting later. Not so good. Okay? Another important thing. You have to store your policy somewhere that you can see it evolve, right? Now, again, the folks I've seen do it successfully, where do they store it? They actually store it in Git. They store it in version control. Why? Accessible to everybody. It has a built-in process and procedure for making changes to it through pull requests and other means, and it's got a history. So I can see that, hey, when the performance on application XYZ started to tank, and that correlates to the time that Sean made a policy change that said that our performance measure only had to be, 10 widgets instead of 50, right? I can see where it happened. I can see the things that changed that might have influenced it. It allows me to build a picture. It also means that I can now do real experiments. And I can say, what should my policy be? Not what my CIO, director of IT, whoever told me it is, but I can actually run an experiment and figure out what it should be, because I can see now where performance or some other metric starts to decline as I evolve my policy document over time. Okay? So because this was a DevOps conversation, right, I had to have a feedback loop in there somewhere. You can't have a DevOps conversation without a feedback loop. People get anxious and they get upset. So why do we have to have a feedback loop? Well, as some of you may be painfully aware, the apps we all deal with do not get any less complicated over time. If any of you have them that get less complicated, let me know. I need to come work wherever you are, apparently, because that's not how things go where I am. We only see things get more complicated, right? And my world looks a heck of a lot more like the orange rectangles on the end than it does even the blue boxes here in the middle. That's not going to go away. And in fact, it's going to get worse than that, because in that picture, those are all components that are theoretically deployed in an environment you control or you own, right? The more we start using provider native services, third-party APIs, widgets that are run by somebody else, third-party wholly owned SaaS, right? Our world actually gets more complicated. There's not a good, strong boundary line even around that orange section anymore. The boundaries probably start going like through the middle of it, okay? So when that's going to be the case, and we have these policy statements, guardrail statements that we talked about previously, we've got them stored somewhere. Now what do we do with them, right? Well, the one enforcement point that I've come up with and that I've seen people use successfully is to use essentially whatever their deployment pipeline or deployment process is. Typically, it's going to be a CD pipeline. Doesn't really matter which one it is. If you have one you like, great. If you don't have one that you like, maybe go look for one, because I think it's going to be important. But we find that this is kind of the cleanest and most universal interface to be able to take those policy statements in, use them to do something useful, and then have whatever piece of information you gleaned from the outside affect the end state of your deployment, right? So if we think about it, right, every pipelining tool I've seen, somewhere they have the make arbitrary REST call stage or job or whatever, right? They all have one, right? And so if I've got guardrail values stored in Git or some other version control, and I've got, my budgeting tool, my performance metrics tool, whatever they may happen to be, right? And I've got these threshold values, essentially these policy values written down somewhere, I can make a call, check the current value, see where it falls against my policy, and then I can write that back to an environment variable in the pipeline and have that piece of information do something useful further on. So, and again, pipelines all act on intent, which is why we like them. Intent is a word we all like now, which just means we're doing stuff on purpose instead of by accident and wandering around trying to figure out what happened and yelling woe is me a lot. So those guardrails, those policy statements, those are an intent as well. They're maybe not intent in the way we're used to giving out config information, but they're absolutely a statement of intent in terms of what we want to have happen and how we want our systems and applications to act. Okay? So the question becomes, should operations be that dog from the beginning, right? Should it be break fix? Should it be chase, right? Or should it be a little more proactive, right? Should it be a little more about those policy statements and those guardrail values in terms of how we're thinking about bounding the environments we put our applications in than it is about figuring out why, you know, container 76 on host 8 had a storage problem yesterday, right? There will always be some of that. There's always going to be stuff that breaks. But if our whole operational procedure is about that, as the number of things scales and the number of new things continues to scale, we're going to have problems. If we make it about refining the boundary conditions and not worrying so much about turning every lever or turning every knob or pulling every little lever, but more about how we bound and how we define acceptable parameters and acceptable performance, we have a better fighting chance. Okay? So this is just a nice picture at the end to kind of give an idea of, if I have my complicated applications that might live in a ton of different environments, it's now a mix between the configuration of that as I deployed it, those artifacts as I put them out, and then what I state in my guardrails that my acceptable operating parameters should be for those applications. And having some mechanism to continually check against those guardrails to make sure I haven't violated them, and if I do, then we can get into, you know, what is a remediation procedure for guardrail X, right? If I'm over budget, what do? Shut stuff down or ask for more money. If I have violated security rule, what do? Well, shut everything down or put me in quarantine until I got my configuration right and I pass my validation. These sort of things, right? So that whole process of using pipelines to do this is something our team's kind of been messing around with for a while. We made some pretty pictures about it. We actually wrote it up in the new stack a few months ago, so you can go there, or there's some stuff about it on our cloudjourney.io site. You can go there to check it out. It's a mental model. It's a framework for thinking about how we do this and kind of taking and pulling some of those best practices we saw with some of our customers and hiding names to protect the guilty, as it were, so that we could kind of put a more neutral framework out there and not upset anybody. All these graphics are up there, by the way, so you guys can see all those later. This is just an idea to kind of see some of the different guardrails and some of the different policy statements that we kind of looked at as we went through that. And we have, actually on the website, we have like a blow-by-blow example of one of these pipelines that has 6 or 7 different validation steps for different parameters that we used as a demonstration for a while. We kind of broke it down job by job and stage by stage. So you can go in there and look at that as well, right? So the thing with feedback loops and putting any of those feedback loops into a pipeline, right? Pipelines are an artifact generation thing, right? You put stuff in, they give you something out the backside, whether that's a deployable image, whether that's an actual deployment of an application, doesn't matter. This process is not that. This is not about generating a thing. This process is an optimization process. This is a refinement. This is about saying, okay, I have a thing, I want to make it better. How tight can I bring the boundaries in and still have this thing work acceptably, and still have it perform the way I want and meet all my criteria? That's what this is about. And frankly, most of the pipelines we saw were kind of unidirectional, and we thought they could benefit from a little in-pipeline refinement, because the reality is all of our customers have some amount of what I like to call operational readiness that happens. Something gets deployed and it's never ready for anybody to use, right? You deploy it and then everybody goes, no, wait. Nobody's allowed to use it for a week. We have to do a bunch of stuff. And if we sold manufactured goods, if we sold cars, planes, anything else like that, we'd all be out of work, right? Like no engineer would ever like let that happen with a material good. But we do that with software and applications all the time. This is a way to maybe pull some of that out of the back end of the process, that post-deployment stuff. Again, my team, that's where we put a lot of our stuff. If anything we said here today resonated or you liked any of it, go look there. There's a bunch more nonsense from me and the misfits in the corner who have mostly dissipated. And that's it. Thanks very much. I have tickets for sensors, which I suspect is why many people are standing around. Please come get some. Or Tommy has them. You can get them from Tommy. Thank you, everybody.